Logan Reed tightened his grip on the small cardboard box as he stepped out of the towering headquarters of Crestline Corporation. Inside were only a coffee mug, a notebook, and a phone charger, the only things he had been allowed to keep after being fired. Behind the glass doors, muffled laughter echoed across the lobby. His department manager, Monica Hayes, stood near the reception desk with a satisfied smile, convinced she had finally gotten rid of the quiet new employee who kept making everyone else look incompetent. Logan didn't argue. He didn't beg for another chance. He simply walked down the front steps, placed the box beside him, and pulled out his phone. After one ring, the call connected. His voice remained calm. Begin the internal investigation. Lock every system in the operations division. Preserve every email, every security log, and every performance review from the last 5 years. No one touches a single file until I arrive. He ended the call without another word. Inside the building, nobody realized that the man they had laughed at just minutes ago was about to change every life in that company forever. 3 weeks earlier, Logan had returned home after spending years helping struggling companies recover overseas. When his father, the founder of Crestline Corporation, asked him to prepare for taking over the business, Logan made one unusual request. He didn't want a luxurious office, an executive title, or special treatment. Instead, he wanted a temporary employee badge and a desk beside ordinary workers. His father agreed without hesitation. If you want to lead this company, he had said, first learn how it feels to work at the bottom. So on a quiet Monday morning, Logan walked through the front entrance wearing simple clothes and carrying an old leather bag. The HR coordinator welcomed him as nothing more than a temporary operations assistant and directed him to the 15th floor. Nobody recognized his last name, and that was exactly what Logan wanted. He believed a company's real character wasn't found in boardrooms or financial reports. It was revealed in the way everyday employees treated one another when they thought nobody important was watching. Unfortunately, it took him less than a single day to realize that something inside Crestline was already deeply broken. The 15th floor looked ordinary at first glance. Rows of desks, ringing phones, glowing computer screens, and employees rushing to meet impossible deadlines. But beneath the busy atmosphere, Logan noticed something far more troubling. People rarely smiled. Conversations stopped whenever a manager walked by. Everyone seemed careful about every word they spoke, as if one wrong sentence could cost them their job. The department was led by Monica Hayes, a manager known for delivering impressive results. Senior executives praised her leadership, but the employees who worked under her avoided eye contact whenever her name was mentioned. On Logan's first day, Monica didn't even welcome him. She dropped a stack of overdue reports onto his desk and coldly said, "Finish these before you leave." The files were a complete disaster, filled with missing data and conflicting numbers. Logan quietly rolled up his sleeves and began fixing every mistake without complaint. By sunset, he had completed work that normally kept 3 employees busy for 2 days. Instead of appreciation, however, he noticed several coworkers staring at him with expressions that looked less like admiration and more like concern. The next morning, Logan discovered why everyone had looked so uneasy. During the weekly team meeting, Monica praised a detailed report that had impressed senior management. She congratulated Daniel, one of her favorite employees, for his outstanding work. Logan immediately recognized every chart, every recommendation, and every sentence. It was the report he had spent hours completing the previous evening. Daniel accepted the applause without hesitation, while Monica smiled proudly beside him. Not once did either of them mention Logan's name. The rest of the team remained silent, their faces showing neither surprise nor guilt. It was clear this had happened many times before. Logan simply took a sip of his coffee and continued writing notes in his notebook. He wasn't upset about losing credit. He was studying the people around him. Every conversation, every stolen achievement, and every unfair decision revealed another piece of a much larger pattern. By the end of that meeting, he understood one important truth. This department wasn't being managed through leadership. It was being controlled through fear, favoritism, and carefully protected lies. And someone at the top had allowed that system to grow for years. Over the following days, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Whenever Logan completed a difficult assignment, someone else proudly presented it to upper management. Whenever a deadline was missed or a small mistake appeared, the blame somehow landed on the newest employee. Monica never questioned the accusations. In fact, she often encouraged them. Logan noticed that even experienced workers avoided defending one another. Fear had replaced teamwork. One afternoon, he watched a quiet analyst named Sarah receive harsh criticism over a tiny formatting error that could have been fixed in less than a minute. Monica chose to humiliate her in front of the entire department instead. Sarah apologized softly, returned to her desk, and continued working with tears quietly forming in her eyes. No one dared comfort her. That moment stayed with Logan long after everyone else had forgotten it. He realized the greatest damage wasn't the unfair treatment itself, it was how normal it had become. Employees had stopped expecting respect. They had simply learned to survive. And Logan knew that any company where people feared their own workplace was already losing something far more valuable than money. As the third week began, Logan decided it was time to stop observing from a distance and start testing the system. He volunteered to organize the department's most sensitive project, an internal compliance audit that required information from multiple divisions. Monica agreed surprisingly fast, almost as if she had been waiting for the opportunity. Logan built a secure tracking system, cleaned years of messy records, and finished the framework 2 days ahead of schedule. To make teamwork easier, he granted limited access to Monica and 2 senior employees, Daniel and Lisa. Everything was documented, every login recorded automatically by the company's security servers. Logan knew exactly who entered the system and when. He never mentioned that fact to anyone. 2 days later, he arrived at the office and immediately sensed something was wrong. Conversations stopped as soon as he walked in. Monica, Daniel, and the HR director were already waiting inside the conference room with serious expressions. Several employees quietly looked away, unwilling to meet his eyes. Before Logan could even sit down, the HR director stepped forward and politely said, "Mr. Reed, we need you to come with us. This won't take long." Inside the conference room, the atmosphere was colder than usual. The HR director placed a thin folder on the table and explained that confidential company data had been copied from the audit system using Logan's employee account late the previous night. According to the security report, his login credentials were directly linked to the breach. Monica folded her arms and sighed as if she were disappointed rather than surprised. Daniel avoided eye contact, while Lisa stared silently at the table. Logan listened to every word without interrupting. When the explanation ended, he calmly asked, "May I see the complete security logs?" The HR director hesitated before answering that the documents had already been forwarded to the legal department and couldn't be shared. A termination letter was then slid across the table. Logan read every line carefully, signed it without protest, thanked HR for remaining professional, and stood up. His calm reaction unsettled everyone in the room. They had expected anger, excuses, or desperation. Instead, he simply picked up the small cardboard box waiting beside the door, smiled politely, and walked out, leaving behind a silence that somehow felt much louder than any argument could have been. Logan packed his belongings in less than 2 minutes. A coffee mug, a notebook filled with quiet observations, and a phone charger were all that remained on his desk. Around him, the office had fallen strangely silent. Some employees pretended to focus on their screens, while others secretly watched him through the corners of their eyes. Sarah looked as though she wanted to say something, but couldn't bring herself to speak. Logan gave her a small, reassuring smile before walking toward the elevator. Outside the building, he placed the box on a nearby bench and took out his phone. One call. One sentence changed everything. Activate Phase 1. Freeze every digital record from the operations division and notify the board that the internal review begins immediately. The voice on the other end replied, "Understood, Mr. Reed. We'll be ready before you arrive." Logan ended the call, picked up his box, and calmly walked toward the underground parking garage. Behind the glass walls of Crestline Corporation, Monica and her team believed they had eliminated another inconvenient employee. None of them realized that the quiet man they had framed wasn't leaving the company. He was about to return through a door that only the highest executives could open. Less than an hour later, a black sedan rolled through the private entrance beneath Crestline Corporation. Security guards who had ignored Logan's employee badge that morning now greeted him with quiet respect. The elevator carried him directly to the executive floor, a place he had deliberately avoided since joining the company. Waiting inside the boardroom were the company's founder, Richard Reed, senior board members, corporate attorneys, and the head of cybersecurity. Richard looked at his son for a moment before saying, "Has the test answered your questions?" Logan nodded, more clearly than I expected. Without wasting another second, the legal team projected the company's security records onto a large screen. Within minutes, the first shocking discovery appeared. Although Logan's account had been used to access confidential files, the login had originated from Daniel's office computer, while Logan's employee badge had already recorded him leaving the building. Someone had stolen his credentials and created a false trail, believing no one would ever investigate deeply enough to uncover the truth. They had underestimated one very important fact. This investigation wasn't being led by an ordinary employee anymore. It was being led by the future owner of the entire company. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Cybersecurity experts recovered deleted emails, login histories, and access records stretching back 5 years. The evidence pointed to the same small group again and again. Daniel had used Logan's credentials, Lisa had altered project records, and Monica had approved nearly every suspicious action. But this wasn't just about one false accusation. The deeper investigators looked, the more disturbing the truth became. Outstanding employees had been denied promotions after reporting unfair treatment. Successful projects had been reassigned to Monica's favorites just hours before executive presentations. Performance reviews had been quietly rewritten to punish anyone who questioned management. It wasn't a series of isolated incidents. It was a carefully protected system built on intimidation, favoritism, and deception. Richard Reed slowly closed the investigation file and looked toward his son. "You've seen everything now," he said. "The decision is yours. What happens next will define the future of this company." Logan remained silent for a moment before answering. "Call every employee to the main atrium at 4 o'clock. Nobody gets warned. Nobody resigns early. Today, the truth will speak for itself." By noon, a short message appeared on every computer screen inside Crestline Corporation. Mandatory company-wide meeting. Attendance required at 4 p.m. in the main atrium. Founder Richard Reed will announce the future leadership of the company. Nothing else was explained. Rumors spread through every floor. Some believed the company was about to merge. Others expected layoffs. On the 15th floor, Monica stood confidently near the windows, telling her team that major changes always created opportunities for loyal managers. Daniel joked that removing weak employees had made the department stronger, and a few people forced polite smiles. Sarah remained unusually quiet. She couldn't stop thinking about how calmly Logan had accepted his dismissal. Something about his confidence hadn't matched the actions of an innocent man who had just lost his job. As the afternoon passed, employees slowly gathered inside the enormous atrium. Hundreds of people filled the space, whispering to one another while staring toward the stage. At exactly 4 o'clock, the lights dimmed. Richard Reed walked onto the platform without saying a word. The room fell completely silent. No one realized they were only moments away from witnessing the biggest surprise in Crestline Corporation's history. Richard looked across the crowd with the calm confidence of a man who had spent 4 decades building the company from the ground up. He thanked every employee for their hard work before speaking about leadership. "A business is not measured only by profit," he said. "It is measured by the way its people treat one another when nobody important is watching." The room grew even quieter. Then he smiled slightly and continued. "For the past 3 weeks, the person chosen to lead Crestline Corporation has been working among you as an ordinary employee." Confused whispers spread across the atrium. Monica frowned. Daniel looked around, trying to guess who Richard was talking about. Then a side door opened. Logan walked onto the stage wearing the same simple shirt and dark trousers he had been fired in that very morning. For several seconds, nobody moved. Monica's face turned completely pale. Daniel stared in disbelief, while Sarah covered her mouth in shock. Richard placed a hand on Logan's shoulder and announced, "Please welcome the next Chief Executive Officer of Crestline Corporation, my son, Logan Reed." The silence that followed was louder than any applause could ever have been. Logan stepped toward the microphone and allowed the silence to settle before speaking. 3 weeks ago, I asked to be treated like every other employee. I wanted no special access, no executive office, and no one to know my last name. I wanted the truth. His voice remained calm, but every word echoed through the atrium. What I found wasn't a lack of talent. It was a workplace where fear had replaced respect. Hard work was stolen, honest employees were ignored, and speaking up often came with a price. He paused and looked directly toward the operations team. "This morning, I was accused of a crime I didn't commit and escorted out of this building. That wasn't an accident. It was the final test." At that moment, the giant screen behind him lit up. Login records, security footage, and email timelines appeared one after another. The evidence clearly showed that Logan's account had been used from Daniel's computer after Logan had already left the office. Gasps spread through the crowd. Monica slowly realized there was no explanation left that could save her. The room remained frozen as the company's chief legal officer stepped forward. "The evidence presented today has already been verified by independent investigators," she announced. "This is no longer an internal suspicion. It is a confirmed case of fraud, workplace misconduct, and deliberate manipulation of company records." At her signal, corporate security officers quietly moved through the crowd. They stopped in front of Monica, Daniel, and Lisa, handing each of them official suspension notices. Daniel tried to protest, insisting he had only followed instructions, but the investigators had already recovered deleted emails proving his direct involvement. Monica demanded to speak with Richard immediately, claiming there had been a misunderstanding. Richard simply shook his head. "For years, you asked employees to accept responsibility for mistakes they never made," he said calmly. "Today, it's your turn to accept responsibility for your own." Across the atrium, employees watched in stunned silence as the people they had feared for years were escorted out of the building. For the first time in a very long time, justice wasn't just being promised, it was happening right before their eyes. The following morning, Logan refused to celebrate. Instead of settling into the luxurious CEO office, he walked straight back to the 15th floor carrying the same notebook he had used as an ordinary employee. The atmosphere had completely changed. Employees who once avoided eye contact now stood quietly, unsure of what to expect. Logan gathered everyone near the center of the office and spoke without reading from prepared notes. "Yesterday wasn't about revenge," he began. "It was about restoring fairness. A company cannot grow if its people are afraid to speak, afraid to fail, or afraid to tell the truth." He announced that every performance review from the past 5 years would be independently re-examined. Promotions affected by favoritism would be investigated, and anyone who had been denied opportunities unfairly would receive another chance. The room remained silent until Sarah slowly raised her hand. "Does that mean honest work will finally matter?" she asked. Logan smiled for the first time that day. "From this moment forward," he replied, "honest work will matter more than anything else." Around the room, people exchanged hopeful glances, realizing that a new chapter for Crestline Corporation had finally begun. Over the next few weeks, change spread through Crestline Corporation faster than anyone expected. Anonymous complaint boxes were replaced with a confidential reporting system that sent every concern directly to an independent ethics committee. Managers were no longer judged only by profits and deadlines. They were also evaluated on honesty, teamwork, and how they treated the people working under them. Logan personally met with employees from every department, listening more than he spoke. Some shared stories of missed promotions. Others admitted they had stayed silent for years because they feared losing their jobs. Logan never blamed them for their silence. "Fear can make good people quiet," he told them. "But from today, this company will protect those who speak the truth, not those who hide it." Within days, several former employees who had resigned unfairly received invitations to return. Word quickly spread throughout the industry that Crestline Corporation was no longer the company it had once been. For the first time in years, People weren't applying simply because of the salary. They were applying because they believed the culture had finally begun to change for the better. One afternoon, Logan asked Sarah to join him in the executive conference room. She entered nervously, expecting another evaluation. Instead, Logan placed a neatly organized file on the table. Inside were copies of every project she had completed over the last 3 years. Nearly all of them had been credited to someone else. "I reviewed your work personally," Logan said. "You should have been promoted long ago." Sarah struggled to find the right words. For years, she had questioned her own abilities, believing she simply wasn't good enough. Now she realized the problem had never been her performance. It had been the people deciding who deserved recognition. Logan offered her the position of Quality Improvement Director, explaining that the company needed leaders who understood integrity instead of office politics. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she accepted. When she walked back into the department, the news spread within minutes. For the first time, employees saw undeniable proof that honesty was finally being rewarded, and that the days of favoritism were truly over. A month later, Crestline Corporation held its annual leadership conference. Unlike previous years, the front row wasn't reserved for executives alone. Employees from every department sat beside senior managers, sharing the same space as equals. During his keynote speech, Logan surprised everyone by inviting several team members onto the stage, including Sarah. Instead of talking about record profits or impressive growth charts, he asked them to tell their own stories. Sarah spoke honestly about the years she had spent doubting herself after watching others receive credit for her work. She admitted there were countless nights when she almost resigned. The audience listened in complete silence. When she finished, the room erupted into applause, not because of her title, but because of her courage. Logan stepped back to the microphone and said, "A successful company isn't built by one leader. It's built by people who feel respected enough to give their best every single day." At that moment, everyone understood that Crestline's greatest achievement wasn't its financial recovery. It was the trust it had finally earned back from its own people. That evening, after the conference had ended, Logan stood alone on the rooftop terrace overlooking the city. Richard quietly joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee just as he had done years ago when Logan was still a teenager. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Richard smiled and said, "When you first asked to work as an ordinary employee, I thought you were making a mistake. Now I realize it was the best decision either of us ever made." Logan looked down at the busy streets below. "The company didn't need another executive," he replied. "It needed someone willing to understand the people behind the numbers." Richard nodded proudly. "Today, I know Crestline is ready for its future." He handed Logan a small envelope containing the official documents confirming his appointment as CEO. But to Logan, the papers mattered far less than the lesson he had learned. Real leadership wasn't earned through family, titles, or authority. It was earned by listening, protecting others, and making the difficult choices that no one else was willing to make. 6 months later, the transformation was impossible to ignore. Employee satisfaction had reached its highest level in company history, staff turnover had dropped dramatically, and productivity continued to rise. Industry magazines praised Crestline Corporation's remarkable turnaround, but Logan knew the real success couldn't be measured by awards or headlines. It was visible every morning when employees entered the building with confidence instead of fear. Managers now walked through the office offering support instead of intimidation. Team meetings had become places where ideas were welcomed rather than stolen. As Logan passed the 15th floor one morning, he noticed something that made him pause. New employees were laughing with senior staff while working together on a project. No one seemed afraid to ask questions or admit mistakes. Logan smiled quietly before continuing toward the elevator. Months earlier, that same floor had been filled with silence and anxiety. Now it represented everything the company was trying to become, a workplace where respect wasn't earned through power, but through character. And he knew the journey was far from over. The best chapters of Crestline Corporation were only just beginning. Nearly a year after the investigation, Crestline Corporation hosted an open house for university students and young professionals. Instead of showcasing expensive offices or impressive technology, Logan insisted they begin the tour on the 15th floor. "This is where our biggest lesson was learned," he told the visitors. As they walked through the department, employees greeted one another warmly. Ideas were shared freely, and managers worked alongside their teams instead of watching from closed offices. One student asked Logan what had caused such a dramatic transformation. He smiled before answering. "Changing policies is easy. Changing culture takes courage. A company grows strongest when every employee believes their voice matters." The students nodded, but the employees understood those words better than anyone. They had lived through both versions of Crestline, the one ruled by fear and the one rebuilt on trust. That difference wasn't written in any handbook. It was reflected in the people themselves. One Friday afternoon, Logan received a handwritten letter with no return address. It came from a former employee who had resigned years earlier after being falsely blamed for a failed project. The letter simply read, "For the first time since I left, I believe justice finally reached the place where it was needed. Thank you for proving that honesty still has value." Logan quietly folded the letter and placed it inside the same notebook he had carried on his first day as an ordinary employee. It reminded him that leadership wasn't about making headlines. It was about changing lives, even those who were no longer part of the company. Before leaving his office that evening, he looked through the glass wall at hundreds of employees finishing their work. They weren't rushing home because they wanted to escape the office anymore. They were leaving with pride, knowing they would return to a workplace where effort was recognized, respect was mutual, and integrity mattered more than influence. Logan smiled to himself, realizing that this was the success he had hoped to build from the very beginning. On the anniversary of his first day at Crestline, Logan walked into the lobby carrying the same worn leather bag he had brought when no one knew his name. The receptionist smiled and greeted him just as she greeted every employee. Logan appreciated that more than any executive privilege. Before heading upstairs, he stopped in front of a framed plaque that had recently been installed near the entrance. It didn't list record profits or famous clients. Instead, it displayed the company's new promise: "Respect is our first responsibility. Integrity is our greatest achievement." As employees passed by, many paused to read those words before beginning their day. Logan knew a plaque alone couldn't change a company, but the people living by those values certainly could. Looking around the busy lobby, he realized that the greatest victory wasn't exposing corruption. It was proving that kindness, honesty, and fairness could become stronger than fear. And that was the legacy he wanted Crestline Corporation to leave behind for every generation that followed. A few months later, Richard officially announced his retirement during a company-wide gathering. As he stepped away from the podium, he invited Logan to take his place. The applause that filled the hall wasn't for the founder alone. It was for the future everyone now believed in. Looking across the audience, Logan noticed faces that once carried fear now filled with confidence. Sarah was leading her team, new employees were sharing ideas without hesitation, and managers were applauding the success of others instead of competing for attention. Taking a deep breath, Logan addressed the room. This company was never saved by one person. It was rebuilt by everyone who chose honesty over fear and teamwork over selfish ambition. Never forget that titles can give someone authority, but only character earns respect. The audience rose to its feet, not because they were expected to, but because every person in that room knew those words had been proven through actions, not promises. In that moment, Crestline Corporation wasn't simply changing leaders. It had found a completely new identity. Years later, business schools studied Crestline Corporation as one of the most remarkable corporate turnarounds in the industry. Many believed the secret was better management or stronger financial planning. But those who had lived through the transformation knew the real answer. Everything changed the day one ordinary-looking employee quietly walked through the front door, accepted unfair treatment without revealing his identity, and exposed a culture that had been hidden for years. Logan often smiled whenever someone called him a brilliant CEO because he remembered carrying a small cardboard box out of the building after being falsely fired. That painful moment had become the beginning of something extraordinary. His journey proved a lesson that every leader should remember. A true leader doesn't demand respect through power. A true leader earns it by protecting the people who have none. And as the lights of Crestline Corporation shone across the city each evening, they reflected more than a successful business. They reflected a place where integrity had finally become stronger than fear. The end.